session of the day, folks. After Jamie presents, we will have a closing from FHWA State Division Administrator Rick Backlund. But before we get to that, this session is called Leverage, ITS Networking for a Better Tomorrow. This presentation will focus on regional and transportation-related communication networks, the infrastructures and software they rely on, and the ongoing evolution they are experiencing. So this is a great way to wrap up a lot of the data information we've been hearing. And we're going to hear from Jamie Gilbert. He has over 35 years of experience in transportation design and planning, and is an active member of both ITS Heartland and ITS America. As the president of GBA System Integrators, he leads a staff of engineers and network specialists responsible for integration, operations, maintenance, and design of communication projects for cities, counties, and state agencies across the US. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Jamie.
Great, thank you, Lisa. So, as you said, this was a great little presentation, I hope, to wrap up today, because everything you guys have been talking about over the last couple of days is about data and analysis and doing things. And as you all know, all of that is based on communication networks, because everything is becoming much more tied together electronically and digitally. So to kind of get this thing started, I wanted to just give a kind of how we got here today. Transportation networking has actually been around a lot longer than most people think. We started doing coordinated traffic signal systems 50 years ago, using twisted copper pairs, serial communications, and very simple designs. There were a master controller in the field that managed 2, 3, up to 15 or 20 other traffic signals. And they talked to the master, and sometimes that master would actually have a dial-up modem to call back to a central computer that could then manage the master controller. But things were pretty basic, and it gave us the start of seeing what could be done. After the serial communication, we started moving in the late 90s into hybrid serial Ethernet, where we started taking advantage of fiber optics and other technologies that were just coming online, so we could go further distances, have higher bandwidth of communication, and doing a lot more. But they were really mixed. We'd have twisted copper pairs, we'd have fiber, you might have a central office, you might have dial-up. You had a lot of different things that were continuing to go on. But sometime around mid-90s, early 2000s, we actually made the jump to where we were building more modern networks. They were Ethernet, and they were starting to be based on internet protocols. So now we had fully managed networks where there were things out in the field we could actually query, and it would tell us how things were working. So we're starting to build much more complicated networks. Well, we were building those, but at the same time, we still had the serial twisted copper pair sitting out there that was still running. So we started to have these mixed modes of different communication. We had meshes, we had topologies of star, we had all the different kinds of networking you could think of. And in transportation, even today, there's all sorts of different mixed modes. But one of the biggest things that the Ethernet era gave us was we started to have more reliability of our networks. When something would go down, things could reroute and reconnect, and we could start getting more functionality. And that kind of brought us to where we're at now with these whole multi-node networks, where there's a lot of intelligence on the street. And the traffic signal networks are doing more than just traffic signals. They're highly redundant, they're intelligent, they can start to fix themselves through modified routing, and they're very high bandwidth capable. So depending upon where you are in the country, in Kansas, or just your network, you could have everything from a high-powered, high communication network that can handle lots of communication, all the way down to still twisted copper pairs that can barely ping a signal to make sure it's still awake and online. So we've got all of those different pieces in play when you talk about the physical and the logical part of the networking. So I talked a little bit about copper and fiber, and most people know about that. That's actually a physical connection between the field devices back to your central server. But there's other systems that are now starting to come online. We're seeing a lot more, couple different medias. One is point-to-point radio systems. These are great because now we can reach out and jump over problem areas. We can cross rivers. We can get on the other side of railroad tracks. They're very high speed, high bandwidth. They do have line of sight limitations, but they're a lot less expensive than doing physical infrastructure in some locations. There are some limitations on what you can transmit, depending upon the bandwidth you're in. But in a lot of locations, a point-to-point radio system has given us the ability to reach places we hadn't been before. Cellular networks. I personally have a love-hate relationship with cellular networks. They're great. They can get us into places we could never get to before, but they have lots of limitations. There can be dark spots in your service. You can have a spot at one location that has very good communication. You go 100 feet down the road and it's a dead spot. And since you don't control the transmission or the acceptance of the signal, all you have is your little cell radio. There's not a lot you can do about that. There's parts of the country that have very limited service. Mountains, large distances without population, cellular is not there. And cellular can be very expensive. It's getting better with regard to speeds with the 5G and the 6G that's coming out. We can get quite a bit of bandwidth, quite a bit of data transmission. But again, you kind of fight the dark spots in the speed. And if you really want to talk about getting into places where there's nothing, it's all about satellite. We do a few satellite installations where we're in just locations where nothing else will work. And it's great for mission critical stuff, but it is incredibly expensive. You can pay up to $4 a megabit. And if you start talking about large data streams, that can get pretty expensive. So we don't use satellite for much, but it's something that people need to keep aware of, especially on a state agency standpoint. That may be what you need for a location that's critical infrastructure, small data sets, but you want to be able to make something connect. So I've kind of talked a little bit about the medias and the physical infrastructure, but why? Why is this important? Well, it's because there's a lot more systems, as you've seen for the last 2 days. Data is where it's all at. Kind of data has been called the new gold. There's all sorts of data running around out there, and we're doing a lot of stuff with it today. We've got all the different hybrid communication medias I've talked about, fiber, copper, cellular, satellite, etc. And everything's kind of IP based, but we're using it for our ITS and ATMS, or traffic management systems, so we can tell the driver what's doing. We're starting to see connected and autonomous vehicles and their dependence upon good data flows and information. Yeah, the autonomous vehicles collect their own data and they kind of make their own decisions, but they still need information from the outside world to really do that better. And we're doing a lot more with observation management security, where we're actually watching whatever's going on so we can do a better job of managing traffic flows. That's just some of what we're doing today. But what we're finding out is other people than just transportation, other technologies, other people, users are having an increasing dependence upon our networks. Police and fire, education, IT groups, heck, even the water departments, the clean water and the dirty water people, they're having systems out there that are managing flow rates. And networking is becoming even more important. We have projects where we're working with some states to get communication systems into state parks, trying to balance, I want to be with nature, but I still want to watch a Netflix movie. So we've got all these different dependencies on the networks that are growing. And probably one of the highest growing is the healthcare industry. Healthcare and education is where we're seeing huge amounts of dependence. So what's that's doing? That's putting more pressure back on the transportation networks. Since a lot of cities or counties, their first communication networking endeavor they ever did was related to transportation, by default, some of these demands start going to the transportation professionals. Hey, you've got a network. Why can't you do more? Well, we can, but then there's more that needs to be managed. There's higher bandwidth needs. There's higher demands, especially on fiber optic systems, because take the same dollar and divide it any way you want. Fiber is almost always the best solution, but it's also one of the most expensive, takes the longest, and has dependence on a whole bunch of other things to make it stay good. So we see that a lot of people are really starting to depend upon the transportation networks or any other network you have for all of these other things. And now we're getting into the last mile concerns. With all of the different things that have been happening, the last mile, the connection to the people that we haven't been able to talk to are becoming much more apparent. So what should we be doing next? These are great questions that we hear every time we talk to people. But I think with some of the things we've learned with COVID, and I'll touch to them a bit more in a minute, is remote access to the networks is becoming much more important. And we have to figure out how to do that. So all the networks have to have higher bandwidth, increased capacity, improve security, but security has to be balanced with other things. And we have to figure out how to make improvements that are important to the system for what the mission is we're trying to do, not just do the newest, best next thing. With the COVID implications, we found out, I think it brought to the forefront something a lot of us had known, but we really hadn't thought about. But the Brookings Institute made a study that there's 50 million students were sent home due to school closings over the last couple of years. That number's probably low, but that was at any given time. And of those 50 million, 9 million lacked home internet. So they were significantly at a disadvantage. Before the pandemic, only about 6% of the people worked before home. Currently, May 2020, and this is a year ago, 2 years ago, over a third were working from home. And that number has stabilized roughly in that same area. So what we're trying to figure out is how do we get communication to those 19 million plus Americans that are in that last mile or in that disadvantaged group. It's kind of an interesting statistic that 97% of the United States is still rural. Most people don't realize that. Only 20% of the population lives rural, but it's 97% plus or minus of the land area. So we're at a significant disadvantage of how do we get out to those areas. And that the cost to get to there is about 80% of the overall cost of implementation. So what we've been doing is we've been talking to people about what are some of the best practices and recommendations we can make. They kind of fall into 4 big buckets: planning, design, implementation, and operation. For best practices, you have to have a plan. You have to understand your communication ecosystem. And ecosystem is a bad word, but you have to understand the whole system. It's just not you and what you're doing. It's what everybody else in the network may be trying to do. You got to have specific goals and make those targeted investments. And you got to figure out things you can do to make improvements soon, because there's always changes to the network. If you're always waiting for the next best thing, you'll always be waiting. So you have to plan and know what you're trying to solve, know your goals. From a design standpoint, you have to create standards and specifications, but they have to be things that are up to date. I hate to say it, but a few years ago, we had to do a project where we had to actually find an 8088 computer running Windows 95, because that was the specification of the software the client still wanted to use. Very hard to do, but we figured out how to do it. So you want to modernize things. You want to create standards and specifications, and you want to create a strong architecture. As an engineer, I don't like the word architecture, but it's the right word, because you have to have a plan in place where everything is going to go. Systems, medias, switches, IP addressing, all those things are going to change. Accept that they're going to change, but have a plan so when they're changing, you're in control of it and you're making the decisions of the decision being made for you. And make a lot of small investments instead of big ones, because they all add up to make good improvements. From an implementation standpoint, have a broad foundation. Don't pick a single media type of thing to do all your work, because it won't solve all your problems. If you've decided we're going to put fiber everywhere, it's a great solution. I wish you luck. You're going to get 95% best coverage, and then there's going to be areas you can't get to. So look for other things that'll work for you. Invest in goals and approaches, not in solutions or vendors or products. Know what you're trying to do and pick the best available technology at that time to solve your problem. Not, I'm just going to rebuy XYZ switch because that's what I've always bought. Understand what you're getting into, and understand that if you make your core network better, I'm talking the stuff that makes everything go, your servers, your switches, your fiber backbone, your point-to-point radios. If you keep strengthening that as you grow, you'll always have capacity for the things that start getting tagged on the edges, because there's always going to be more. Communication networks aren't getting smaller, they're only getting bigger. And from an operations standpoint, measure the things that really matter. Don't look at costs. if all you do is basing your improvements on costs, you're always going to be disheartened and upset. Are you solving the problems or goals you set out to do? Are you getting the information you need to make good decisions in a timely manner? Measure those things. Then you actually have something you can go and say, we're making the proper investments, not just we spent a lot of money. Train your staff to take advantage of the systems and the technology you've already invested in. That's probably one of the best things people can do. It's kind of like Excel and Word. All of us use probably 20% of the capabilities of those softwares. Most networks that have been built, people only use a fraction of the capabilities that are out there. So we need to focus on spending time for those and training our staff to take advantage of those things. Probably one of the biggest hot buttons right now is all about security. There is no good single answer. There is no single answer because everybody's security needs are dependent upon what they're doing. People that are trying to take over networks generally do it for two reasons. One's economic and one is nuisance. Typically in the past, the people that have hacked into transportation networks have been more the nuisance type. They wanted to put messages on signs, et cetera, that are, to change, to embarrass people or to put up false messages. That's serious. It needs to be stopped, but that's one level of concern. Economics, where people can hack into a network and get personal information, credit card information, information about police records, et cetera, that's much more serious. So that takes a much higher level of security issue or concern. So you have to figure out what fits your needs and your issues. So research what you're doing. If you're building a network that's only going to talk to traffic signals or to devices, detectors for the environment and things like that, and there's no economic, there's no personal data, there's nothing else out there, that requires one level of security. If you have a network that all these other things are kind of in there, associated or close by, that could be got to, takes a whole nother thing. So you have to research, identify, and plan, and then you have to engage security providers that can help you figure out what you need. And then you have to implement your plan, monitor your system like any other thing else, and then make continual upgrades on the feedback you get. Hackers are always, I hate to say it, at least one step ahead of the security providers, because the security providers don't know what to change or to make secure until somebody's hacked it in a lot of cases. So you really need to understand your level. You don't want to pay for a super high level of security if you don't need it. It slows your network down. It can slow your network down. It can make access, especially remote, much more difficult. It can do a lot of things that are non-beneficial to you and your users. So don't do it unless you have to. But if you have to, figure out how to do it and do it correctly. So kind of in closing, the big thing about transportation, communication, networking, and I say transportation because that's kind of where I live, but it really affects all communication networkings, whether it's city, county, state IT, transportation, a melange of both of those together, is commit to a couple different things. One, commit to improving your technology and having performance measures. Measure the things that matter. Commit to finding partnerships, because if you can find other people that have network needs, fire, police, parks and rec, whoever, that maybe you can then share resources and make a better network if you can create that partnership and come up with a good overarching architecture. You have to create a plan and follow it, because if you don't, if you're always chasing the newest, greatest, hottest thing, your network will grow organically, which is great, but then you can get weeds in it and it's a lot harder to manage. So have a plan and follow it, but have a plan that you can tweak as you grow and learn, because it's a living document. Make improvements now. Don't wait, because the communication needs are only growing. They're only going to get more expensive. Nothing gets cheaper over time. Capabilities go up for lower costs, but needs go up faster. So you always have to be investing. And understand that you're part of the greater community. It's not just about the single thing you're doing. If you can find those partnerships, if you can invest in that technology and plan, it's not just about traffic anymore. It's about a solution that fits what everybody needs together. So you have to kind of commit to making a difference today. And it takes work and it takes investment, but you have to start with understanding physically what you have, logically what you have as a network. What do you need that network to do today, in the near term, and then ultimately what's the growth of this network going to be, and then how am I going to get there? So commit to knowing those things and commit to making a difference today. And I think I got through my presentation a little bit quick, so if I'm ready for any questions.
Awesome. We have a question from Mike Olson. Are you working with connecting via low altitude satellites? He has SpaceX in parentheses. I live in central Kansas and have reliable internet access for the first time after 20 years of trying different options. Something like this may be my only cost-effective solution to serve me at the end of the last mile.
Yes, we are actually working with SpaceX on a couple different investigations and deployments. And I think low altitude satellites are a great solution for some instances. It's like everything else, you have to match the technology to the need. As you get into the more rural areas with low density populations, SpaceX is excellent because you've got an opportunity to have signals dispersed over a bigger area. If you were trying to use SpaceX in downtown Chicago, probably not the best solution available for you, just because if everybody there was hitting the same SpaceX satellites, you'd overwhelm the system. So it all depends on where you're at, but yeah, we're seeing some good opportunities there. The big issue I have with SpaceX is maturity. I think it's probably 5 to 10 years away from being what I would call a stable system. I think it's great now, and they're getting there closer, but they need a lot more satellites in the air before it's going to be something that's going to be dependable everywhere.
All right, and Mike Floberg mentions there's a current goal for Kansas to have everyone connected by the end of 2026.
It's a great goal.
I have a question that I think challenges a lot of local communities who want to start investing in these types of things. And you brought it up a little bit, but as soon as you bring in hardware, it becomes obsolete. And so how do you get in front of the obsolescence and make a difference, get started? How do you program in your budget for the fact that something you buy today will be obsolete, maybe even by the time it's installed? So how do you deal with that challenge?
Well, the way we try and work with our clients to do that is, one, technology has built-in obsolescence. I mean, your cell phone, how many times have you changed your cell phone in the last 5 years? So what you want to do is buy good enough hardware that it has been pre-designed to allow software upgrades to keep it compliant. So if you buy the least expensive thing possible, the odds are it will go into obsolescence sooner. So if you can buy something a little better, software and firmware can upgrade it and extend that life. But the other thing is you have to budget for equipment replacement. Most of your transport medias, your fiber, your twisted copper pair, some of the bigger point-to-point radio systems, they're going to last, well, fiber is going to last forever if it doesn't get cut and it's underground. But some of the other systems are really lifetime for 10 to 12 years. That's as long as they're expected to last. So you have to budget it. Transportation or communication networks are a living thing. So you have to have a rolling replacement budget. It's not a bridge you build it once, you wait 20 years and you mess with it. You have to have an ongoing budget every year. Think of it as a pothole program. You don't know where the potholes are going to be in your city, but you know you're going to have to fix them every year. Same thing with communication networking. You have to have a budget to maintain, operate, and improve every year, depending upon what becomes obsolescent, what becomes broken, and just have a rolling plan of how you're going to deal with that. And that's one of the biggest struggles people have, because you get your CapEx money from the feds, but you don't get any OpEx. So you have to come up with a plan of how you're going to operate the system once it's built.
So a lot of our communities, especially in the urbanized areas, have ITS architecture plans.
Mm-hmm.
How do you take that plan and decide how to start implementing it? What are some recommendations for how you go from the plan to implementation?
The biggest thing is a lot of the communities that are at least in a large enough metropolitan area already have a regional ITS plan that comes from the MPO. That regional architecture, start there, because that will give you kind of the guidelines. But how you implement that is, again, you got to know what you're trying to do. Iola, Kansas is not going to try and build a network equivalent to Overland Park, Kansas. There's no need. So have realistic goals, identify what you need, what you want to get to, and then the steps of how to do it. It takes a full master planning session. It doesn't have to be expensive. We're not talking about a big systems engineering plan, but you have to have something that gives you some guidance to move forward. And at the end of the day, it's what are we trying to do with this network? What is this communication network going to support? Is it only one thing? Is it 10 things? Because the more complicated, the more users, the more diverse parties involved, the higher cost for the equipment, the higher cost for maintenance, the more technical your maintenance staff needs to be, and they all have built-in costs. So if you start off with the vision, we're going to build the New York City, Manhattan network, and you really don't need that, you're buying problems you don't have to have. So having somebody kind of shepherd you through the process of here's what you really have, here's what you really need, can really set the stage the best.
So what a lot of us have to talk to non-technical decision makers about
Every day.
these types of outlays. How do you recommend, if you had an elevator speech or some key points to talk about the initial capital outlay and the importance of maintenance and operations that really is resonant with a local city manager or with elected officials? How do we tell that story?
Wow, that's a hard question, because my general elevator speech is, do you have time to go sit in the bar? That's where because there is so much here that you have to kind of decode, you have to get into. The biggest thing is when I speak with cities and counties, kind of an initial is, my question to them is, where do you want to be?
Yeah.
What are you trying to do? And get them to start asking questions or answering questions, because they have to have a vision. If the city doesn't, if all their plan is, I want to institute an ITS plan, that's really not the right answer or the right question to ask, because there has to be a purpose for the network. There has to be a reason we're doing it. And there has to be somebody that's going to benefit. Our goal as civil engineers is not to build networks because we like networks. Our goal is to satisfy a purpose. This generally, it's state money, it's city money, it's taxpayer money we're using. So it should satisfy some taxpayer need. Get that identified, get your hands around that, and then start coming up with how do we solve it. If it's, I just want the traffic signals to talk to each other, that's one level of answer. If it's, I want to be a smart city and I want smart parking meters, I want to be able to tell people when the parking lots are full, I want weather stations, I want all the traffic signals to communicate to all the cars. Now you're talking about magnitudinally different. So having an understanding of what their mission is, what their desires are, that's where you start. And then you start building from there.
Awesome. Thank you, Jamie. And I just want to say, we are lucky in Kansas to have folks like Jamie and GBASI who really got the need for this years ago and have been talking to us about this implementation ever since. I think you guys got in really early, and it's good to have those technical experts in Kansas.
Well, thank you very much. We've been doing it for 15 years, and it's been a learning experience.
Awesome. So to close the summit, we will hear from Rick Backlund, the Division Administrator for the FHWA Kansas Division, a role he has held since 2016. Rick leads FHWA's efforts working with Kansas DOT, Kansas Turnpike Authority, the MPOs, local governments, and other transportation partners advancing the planning, design, construction, and monitoring quality of roadways across the state. Thanks for closing out the summit, Rick.
Sure, thank you. And I just have my camera on. Can you see me, folks?
Yes.
Okay, great. First off, I just want to take a step back to 2 years ago when, as part of Federal Highways Everyday Counts program, we have a State Transportation Innovation Council, otherwise known as a STIC, here in Kansas. We were talking about, well, how do we craft a summit that's really going to be Kansas focused and on Kansas innovation so that our local governments could come and really have a chance to dialogue. So what was initially intended to be in Wichita, I just want to say a huge thank you to all the folks that spoke and to Lisa and to KDOT. Awesome event over the last week. We've had quite a wide swath of topics we've talked about, from innovations in local streets through architectures, climate planning. So a big thank you to everyone who's been involved as a speaker, et cetera. I think it just goes to show the depth of the types of creativity we are experiencing in our region. I hope that everyone who's attended has been able to find some nuggets of information, some takeaways, and frankly, some new connections to move forward. I think this session was the perfect one to have the closeout right after. And the comments we were just having about, well, what are we trying to achieve? It all comes back to the need and determining what those goals are for the needs we have in our local communities. So I'll just take some of the final nuggets of discussion we had in this and just frankly say that was really the intent of this summit, was to identify what those needs are and then find connections to come up with answers. So great job, everyone. As part of Federal Highways Everyday Counts program, we're constantly looking for innovations as well. And Javier, I want to thank you as well for being a part of this. And there's ideas coming from this that we'll share as well. So that's about all I have. I did want to repeat also what Secretary Lorenz talked about early. Us moving forward, being creative, looking for new ideas and implementing them. And I think that's the name and the game of what we've been doing over this week. So thank you all. Those are just some parting thoughts, and we look forward to takeaways from this event and moving forward.
Thank you, Rick. And I would say that there are a lot more funding programs now than there were when we started this conversation. We have the Innovation Funding Program at KDOT. We have STIC that we often each year try to find projects to fund to talk through the Everyday Counts initiatives. And so I encourage you to all be thoughtful about ways you can innovate at your local scale and just try things out, work with your universities, work with your MPOs or your state DOT to try to figure out the best way to solve your problems. And we hope that these last 2 days of the summit have really helped inspire you and come up with some thoughts and also some partners you can work with.
Great point, Lisa. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. It is time for us to turn off and you guys go have some lunch. Let us know if there's any way we can help and support you. And we will be posting these videos to our YouTube channel, and we'll send an email out to y'all so you know where to find them. But other than that, thank you guys for attending.